Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm really excited to dig into how you've spent money. Okay. So just trying to, because what we like to do at Next Chapter Raise is really share stories from founders who are already out there, working the business and kind of sharing their examples of things that they've done. So for many of us, we want to see someone who's a bit of ahead of us in the cycle and get some insights and learn from that. And we talked about the fact that one of the things the HSBC report showed, we need more role models. We need to see more women in business and, kind of as representatives. So it's a real pleasure to have you both up here. What I'd like to do is just say thank you both for coming. And, Winnie is from Pickupp, and I'd just like to start with, you recently joined as their Chief of Staff, which is fantastic. And, can you share more about Pickup's business, but also your role since you've joined? I mean, what the Chief of Staff does at Pickupp?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Winnie. I'm the Chief of Staff at Pickupp. I oversee many operational aspects of the company, ranging from strategic partnerships to finance to risk management. And my work involves a lot of collaboration with my executive team members to strategize and prioritize business strategies. And on top of that, I'm also responsible for fundraising and investor relations.
Fantastic. And can you share, I'm not sure if everyone here has used Pickupp, but can you share a bit about Pickupp itself?
Yeah, sure. So we are very blessed to have done a few rounds of fundraising over the past few years, with the latest round finished just end of last year, which was led by Jardine Matheson. And we're very lucky that our shareholders are all very supportive in terms of supporting us to achieve the vision that we have in the logistics space, which has not changed since day one, which is to make logistics more efficient in terms of both time and cost, and at the same time provide the transparency, total transparency in the entire supply chain. Because we started the business in 2016, and back then the pain point that we saw was that logistics could get very complicated. And this is especially true in Asia Pacific, where there are so many country borders. And also in Asian countries, we tend to have very complicated addresses as well. For example, in Hong Kong, we're one of the countries that with no postcodes. And we also have narrow urban streets to navigate. We have village houses with non-standard addresses. And that gets very complicated. And if you are a social seller or a small and medium-sized merchant selling with customers locally and overseas, what happens is that you frequently find yourself needed to engage multiple service vendors just to get your products to your consumer. So we wanted to change that, and it gets very complicated and wanted to change that. And we want to change that by creating a network of supply chain solutions, an integrated network that are able to provide a holistic supply chain solutions to everybody, which right now is only available to large corporates that can afford to hire a big team to navigate through this very complicated supply chain space. So we have been very focused in that vision, and we have been focused in building out that network. So throughout the years, we invested a lot in technology. We invested a lot in data analytics, and that involves a lot of engineering hours that make the user experience pleasant. So right now, we've just celebrated our 6-year anniversary, same as Bianca's company. So we now have presence in Hong Kong, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Singapore. And on our network right now, we have over 150,000 freelance delivery agents that's plugged into our network. And we also have micro-fulfillment warehouses. We have pick-up and drop-off partners on our network as well. So we have been very focused in that, and we didn't really forget to go back to our mission statement and make sure that every dollar that we spend is taking us there.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for being here. And so, Bianca, I'd love to hear about Clare.AI and WATI. What drove you to launch those, and what you hope to achieve with them in terms of kind of the mission behind them.
So our company's mission is helping businesses to do more with less. We started with Clare.AI, which we've always been in the conversation and messaging space. And Clare.AI primarily focuses working with larger enterprises. So that was in 2016. And what we've learned since then is, since becoming an official WhatsApp partner, we are helping a lot of global SMBs to help them simplify the WhatsApp communication. So I'm sure all of you have WhatsApp here. We serve 4,000 customers across 78 countries. Our team is in 8 countries, including Brazil and Colombia, so as far as you can kind of think of. And basically what we help them is help these global SMBs to do sales support and marketing on WhatsApp. So that's where we started off with. I think going forward, we are looking to expand kind of different channels, make it easier, connect to different workflows to make it, again, easier for the merchant.
And you founded Clare.AI with another founder, right?
Yeah. So correct? It's the same company, just 2 different products. So that might be confusing. But basically, we pivoted from the Clare.AI, which is a traditional enterprise business, towards a self-service model. So I think easiest way to understand is in the past, we used to serve like larger enterprises, and now we sell very generic, simple to set up product, low-code type of products to SMBs.
Okay. Fantastic. Now, you both mentioned you fundraise, you're in multiple countries, you've been growing, and I think that's what I'd like to just chat about in the next few questions is, Winnie, looking at Pickupp, I think you've raised in total $50 million over the past 3 years or so. And, it'd be interesting for you to share, how do you spend that? How does that money get deployed to scale the business? I mean, how do you go about deploying that, working with that, and, putting it to work? So, we talked about runway. You're on your runway. You're working towards that. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned just now, we never really forget to go back to our mission statement and our vision, which is to make last mile delivery more efficient in terms of cost and time, and also to provide it through transparency. So the example that I quoted just now was that if you are a SMEs, a merchant, or a social seller that sells locally and overseas, right? Right now, you're probably, depending on what you ship in locally, in Hong Kong, if you need handling of very complicated items or delicate items such as cakes, or you need a very specific type of fast dispatch within a matter of hours, you're probably just local services. You need to engage at least 3 vendors just for that part of the of that service. And then you need to engage another vendor to do the international portion. And as your business grows bigger, you probably have to find another partner to do the storage and the fulfillment solution for you. So we find that very complicated to navigate, and in the nowadays the new e-commerce, to enable these merchants, we wanted to create a one-stop solution. We wanted to create a network that has all the solutions in there and be able to provide a holistic one-stop service to them. So over the past 6 years, we have been very focused on that. We have been very focused on building out this network and enable our SME merchants.
So from like a hiring perspective, do you find you're going, very heavy on tech, or is it the fact that you've got to build out this platform? I think you mentioned you have 150,000 drivers freelance. I mean, where do you find that the money is going in terms of the kind of the departments or the hiring?
Yeah, so we invested a lot on technology and also data analytics. And I think one thing that we find useful to us is that we are a consumption-driven company. We create value in response to a service request. So it's important to understand ourselves that we're scaling the consumption here. And during the scaling process, I think what we wanted to achieve is to be able to have more interaction with our merchants. So what we do there is to have more interaction with our merchants and understand their merchants better, so then we'll be able to provide a tailor-made solution for them. So in terms of the investments that we've done over the past few years, we are a bit different from traditional logistic providers in the sense that we are crowdsource based. We crowdsource delivery agents in all sorts of sizes, walkers, bikers, drivers, van drivers, truck drivers. And we don't only crowdsource delivery agents, we also crowdsource space. So just now I mentioned about storage and fulfillment solutions. We have partners for them. We have partners that are plugged into our network that provide storage and micro-fulfillment solutions. So over the past few years, we have been very heavily invested on enabling our partners to be plugged into our network to service our merchants.
I mean, I think we talked about this in the first panel, but again, in there is this iteration, this is this feedback, it's understanding the customer, it's product market fit continually. I feel as like there's an element of that, and it's something that I think we start a business, we get our product market fit and we're done. I don't think that's ever the case.
Correct. That's precisely true. For example, understanding the merchant portion, right? That's why we insist to have a shop on Pickupp platform, whereby our merchants could actually list their products with us. During COVID, we realized a lot of our merchants who do not have an online presence, they were struggling. And what we have is that we have a storefront. We provide a online plugin for them. They are able to list their products, list their service with us. We are able to provide product listing, payment gateway, and storage, micro-fulfillment solutions, and obviously last-mile delivery for these agents as well. So it's a one-stop service. And what we achieve is that we get to know them better, we get to know their customers better, and with enough data, we are even able to provide predictive inventory for them. And because we handle all the last-mile deliveries, we know exactly where the parcels go to. So we can even exactly tell them where to put the inventory in order to enable quick commerce. So that part of it, we find it very powerful, and throughout the process, during the scale process, we make sure that we can achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, you're really creating value add because you're actually looking at your data not just in terms of success for you, but it's a loop you're creating, right? In terms of supporting the partners, you're creating this great value add loop, which is great to see. So thank you for sharing that. Bianca, I mean, you're in the same situation. You closed the Series A last year. I mean, could you share about... And B?
And pre-A.
Pre-A, yes, sorry.
Pre-A and
yes.
A within the same year.
Yeah, so you had a busy year. I mean, if you could just share about, first of all, if we stay on the same conversation around, what are you doing with that money in terms of growing the business and deploying it?
Yeah, so for us, we are a SaaS platform. Tech is definitely one of the kind of main areas of investment. We're also building out the management team. So that was in the past, very much like Ken and I, who's my co-founder. We've just been kind of doing everything, right? And now we realize at each stage there is the investment that you need to make in order to make the foundation work. Because in the past it's like, you can get by with like a part-time person to help on bookkeeping. No longer the case, right? Like people would be like, why is this not accurate? Like, why is the information not there? And I think it's also like, it's almost like a learning curve at each stage. And we've kind of accelerated that way because we did pre-A and A within the same year. And typically it takes a bit of time before you kind of raise the next fund, which allows you that time to kind of build out the team and also have the people ready. So yeah, I think mainly we've been mainly investing on like the technology, how to make it like simpler for our merchants. So that's one end. The other end is also building up the management team. So we're incredibly lucky. We have Freshdesk #2 PM product manager who's joined us. So she's based in India. Freshworks is actually listed in I think New York Stock Exchange last year. So a really big company, and she's been in the early days till the end. We also have the ex-MD of Twitter of Southeast Asia who've joined us at Head of Customer. We also onboarded a CTO who has a startup background. So now Ken and I are no longer just like running around like headless chickens, but also have our management team that we can kind of rely on.
I mean, what fundraising does is it helps you become more appealing or interesting to certain profiles that may be willing to move from certain roles into a startup, but a quickly scaling up business. I mean, you touched on the fact you did a pre-Series A and Series A in 1 year, which is, super tight, a really quick process. What were some of the things that you think contributed to your success in fundraising? You mentioned that you are an official partner of WhatsApp. Can you share a bit more about that? Was that something that was instrumental in the process?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's hitting the right market and also growing really fast that helped our investors to see. We're all, like for both rounds, we were mainly backed by Sequoia, which is the same kind of funding partner. And they understood, how we were kind of like doing operations and all sort of stuff. So they understood our metrics quite well. I think they can see that growth kind of like that comes really fast. And as a result, I think that's why we did. It's more about timing. I think that plays a big role. Rather than, okay, I'm ready with this. now let me go out and raise, right? Because typically for SaaS, it's an incredibly benchmark business. You would know when you raise A, what's the MRR, what's the gross margin, and all of that. And I think, back to the earlier kind of panel, there's a lot of that financial literacy that you need to get used to. But also, with SaaS is incredibly benchmarked. So, it will be easier to see, okay, where are you with MRR or ARR? Where are you with the growth? Are you top of the line? Are you like top 5% or like 15th percentile or 50th percentile? Then that's kind of like an easier, like it's a way to benchmark yourself against, like if you want to do the fundraising route or just go with like a bootstrap, that's also fine.
Yes, it's another language you've had
Yes.
to learn, right? Just pure fundraising, but SaaS fundraising,
Yeah,
I mean,
correct,
particularly, right? Which I think is a really valid point. As you're growing your business, each industry has its own metrics that you need to be working to. So kind of keeping that in mind, I think, is important. And I mean, Winnie, now that you've joined Pickupp, what would you say as kind of the 3 areas that you see as a priority for scaling the business? I mean, within confidential means, but I mean, what do you see as kind of within your role? What would you like to be focusing on?
Sure. So we have been very focused on building out a network as a service that I mentioned just now. I think what we have done in the past few years was quite remarkable. So last year we opened up Taiwan in the midst of COVID. We basically onboarded the entire Taiwan team remotely from Hong Kong, and we had huge success. We were able to achieve the kind of scale and profitability within a relatively short time compared to our other new city launches. So I think in a way we have demonstrated that we have a very repeatable business model here, and that is certainly very helpful for our next fundraise. And what we're trying to do right now is that we have presence in 4 regions: Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Taiwan. So what we're trying to enable here is to enable the intercity end-to-end solution. So in a way, you can imagine that as we build out this network, we are actually also expanding the addressable market here, like Andy mentioned just now. So that is one of the priority that we have at the moment. In order to take the company to the next level. So I would say in the next medium term, be able to make more synergies within the regions that we presence in would be one of our priorities.
Okay, fantastic. And you've both mentioned follow-on funding. And I mean, if you're just starting out fundraising, I mean, we often talk to founders around looking for the right investor or researching investors. But part of the discussion when you're first fundraising is the expectation that there will be follow-on fundraising. So as a founder, being aware of that as you're building out your pitch deck or your story. But I think also looking for your investors, do they have the capacity to have follow-on funding? And I mean, I'd like to hear, Bianca, from your story around, you've with Sequoia, obviously, a big VC, so the capacity's there. Was that something, though, that you had in mind or you're aware of when you started? Or is it just, it kind of happened?
Yes, definitely. Follow-on just saves you time. I do think there is fundamental differences between earlier on investors and later on investors, right? Because I would say, like the Series B or above, they care a lot about downside protection. All they negotiate with you, all the terms are focused on how do I recuperate my kind of money. At least on the institutional side, right? Like I think CVC looks at it differently, which is corporate VCs. So they're like, how do I make sure my downside is limited? Can I get a qualified IPO, which is, like the IPO has to be at least X amount of kind of return of kind of what I put in now. Versus earlier on, I think they care a lot more about like who's the founder? Is there founder market fit and that? So I think that actually has a quite fundamental difference. But with follow-on, there's also another thing, I think, which is really important for everyone here. Understand where their fund is, right? Whether they're in the beginning of the deployment cycle or end of the deployment cycle. Why that's important is, say, they give you, I don't know, like for us, say like they give us like 8 million. Of those 8 million, how much do they have reserved as a follow-on, right? Ask those questions early on. And also, if the fund is later kind of in their deployment period, they might be in a rush to get that money back. right? First, and also how big is the fund? Usually these institutionals have multiple funds, right? So like we were both in the early stage fund as well as the growth stage funds. So there are a lot of these that are quite fundamental, and it's easy to tell like when you kind of like look at the details, like look at their announcement, look at when they mention, look at how much they've raised, like because as investors, they also need to raise from other people, right? So that's like understanding the industry as a fundamental. I think it's really important for you. Because just so, I would say in the earlier stage, look for angel investors and all that. They might not have a lot of follow-on funds, but it might not matter as much, right? I would say probably, if the best, obviously you can raise from Sequoia from day one. But, I think the reality is there's always a stepwise goal towards that, right? So I would definitely say, do your warm-ups, right? Get used to kind of angel investors, how you interact with them. Once you need to level up, then, okay, understand what their language is, understand what pushes the industry, and then you'll be able to kind of push those buttons. So I think that's the important part.
Yeah, I mean, that's super comprehensive. And I think, I'd like to see, Winnie, if you had any other thoughts on follow-on funding, because, obviously Pickup's, a very fast-paced business, in terms of 50 million in 6 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with Bianca. I think there's a very big difference when it comes to the conversation with the investors, whether you're at more early stage or later stage. And I think these days the conversations, also because of the macro environment, more conversations around path to profitability. And how do you scale your business to achieve the profitability? So I think that conversation happens a lot more frequent now. I think it's a mix of investor behavior and the macro environment, and that's something that we are prepared for every day.
I think also one of the takeaways here, and I know we talked about confidence and conviction, but I think it's around conviction about your business, but it's building confidence about understanding the investor language and having the confidence to research and understand your investor and ask them the questions, right? Because the thing is, you're having to really understand the situation of the investor you're targeting, which is different from the angel to the venture capital. And as you move along into the different stages, even of, Series A, as you go into Series B, etc. And I think the one thing that we see is, not just thinking, oh, I need the money. It's really what's the relationship here, and understanding who else have they invested in, how successful has the portfolio companies been, have there been any exits, have they done follow-on funding, really doing your research around investors, I think is really helpful. And as you said, even understanding the fund structure, which is the next step down. How big is it? How much is deployed? Where are they? I think these are all things as you go from your angels and your early stage VCs moving along, I think are really valid points. Bianca, I'd like to just ask you one other question, kind of a final question each before we finish up for tonight. If you had to do kind of fundraising all over again, or you had tips for the audience here who might be thinking of fundraising, I mean, what are the top 3 things you would do again, the same, differently, or suggest others do?
Raise early, right? It's always, like as they say, never enough time. The second part, I think, it's because I'm like the founder, and obviously every time fundraising, there's always like, I don't know about Andy, but to me it's always bittersweet. I'm like, damn it, I need to, sorry for the language, but I always need to dilute myself a bit more, right? And it's always, that kind of like calculation game of, how are you controlling the company or are you not, right? Like that's a very realistic question that you need to ask as an entrepreneur. And at times, there are times where, you're raising a down round and, life happens. And as a result, you lose the control of the company, right? So I would say, back to that is think about what would affect you in the next round and negotiate earlier in this round. So I think this is important because if you think about it, a certain percentage that you set in the shareholding structure, whether you qualify for a board, whether, what type of information rights do you have, like all of that is set up in the earlier rounds. And in the later rounds, it's always like a kid, right? If you give them chocolate every day, and all of a sudden you say, you can only have chocolate on Saturday, they would rebel, right? They would be like, why am I getting lesser rights? Or why am I kind of getting treated poorly? So I think having those more difficult conversations early on, but also at the same time striking a balance on is this super important? If it's not, let's move on and let's get the deal done, because the timing is also super key towards like fundraising, closing, the market sentiment, right? Like Winnie has said, right? That would change, and all of a sudden it would just like the winds would have changed, and you realize that originally you're going towards this direction, and now all of a sudden it's going south, right? Which is not what you want. So I would say, just like be careful on those few things. Like it's always a balance, and there's nothing as like it's 100% you or 100% us. I would say it's not that, but like finding the fine line of balance that works both for the company's growth, for yourself, as well as the investor. I think that's where you always need to kind of take a fine line and balance.
And you talk a lot about negotiation and it's often knowing what should we negotiate. Did you ever find that you had advisors, maybe a lawyer or someone that was useful in terms of helping you negotiate the negotiations, I suppose?
Yeah, I always think, it's good to have people a few steps ahead of you as, good friends, and that you can kind of like brainstorm ideas with and say like, hey, have you seen this before? Because I tell you, 95% of the time, all of the investors tell you this is a common thing that they ask for, or this is customary. It is never customary. I think there's always a common way to do it. Whether that's the right way for you, you need to make that judgment. So I have a really good group of friends that I kind of rely on. And also, our lawyer has been incredibly helpful. But again, I would say at times you want to jump, a few steps ahead. And at times you realize, right, like you can only do 10 push-ups today. You won't get to 30 tomorrow, right? You would need to go from 10 to 11 to 11.5, and sometimes go back to 10, right? At times, you might not be at the best days. So like it's about like if you have people a few steps ahead of you to give you some advice, obviously legal advice as well, I think that would help.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Winnie, just a final question for you is around, building company culture. I mean, what are the tips or suggestions you would give about either hiring practices or building teams that really build a culture that kind of works?
Sure. I emphasize a lot on sticking to the vision. Make sure that your vision is sorted out and well aligned within the company, not just among the senior management team members. I think as the company grow and scale, it's important to make sure that that vision and alignment is funneled down to the working level and to every new joiner, because that's very important. And I think that's what it takes to the company to the next level, because ultimately people is the most important asset of the company.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your time this evening and sharing all those insights. Very inspiring for both of you, the stories of the company. So thank you for the time out.